Hey, what's up everybody? Hammerheart Metal Reviews here once again. Today we're doing another discography countdown, and today we're going to be talking about the death metal legends from Florida, Obituary. Just dropped a brand new album, Dying of Everything, yesterday. I'm going to be including that in my overall discography ranking. This band has been around since 1988 to the present day. Probably a band that needs no introduction, one of the bigger names in death metal. They've had 11 albums over the course of their career. I will say they are of varying quality. They have a handful of absolute classics, but then there's a few duds along the way as well. This is not necessarily the most technically proficient band, but man, they can play some heavy ass death metal. They are most well known for the unique vocalist, John Tardy. Of course, you hear his voice instantly recognizable. He's been in the band since the beginning with his brother Donald Tardy on drums, Trevor Perez on rhythm guitar, and then they've had some other revolving members as their career has gone on. One of the most unique death metal vocalists out there for sure. In addition to that, they're really known for their unique guitar tone. You hear it right away, you just know it's Obituary. And really, they're a band that kind of excels in mid-paced grooves for death metal. They're not the fastest band, they're not the most aggressive band. It's just really mid-paced stuff. I will say they can tend to get a little bit tedious or boring at times, at least in my opinion. Out of their whole career, the 11 albums, I will say I only go back to a handful of these on the regular. There's quite a few of these that I just don't go back to that often. I could even say that this is a somewhat overrated band. And maybe if you're a diehard Obituary fan, you're probably not going to enjoy this video too much because I'm going to kind of be shitting on some of these albums, but I just tell it like it is. I just want to give my honest opinion on all of these albums, and as John Tardy says, if you don't like this, I really don't care! But yeah, great vocalist. Let's just get into this. I'm going to count these down from my least favorite to my favorite Obituary album, so let's see what order I've got them in. Alright, so coming in last place, my least favorite Obituary album is Inked in Blood from 2014. I just found this one really redundant of previous albums. Pretty much just straightforward Obituary style death metal, not really bringing anything new to the table, which isn't always a bad thing, but this album I just didn't really find very interesting. It kind of felt like they're going through the motions. I just really find it boring and bland. It doesn't hold my attention, and I just really don't enjoy it at all. It did see Terry Butler, formerly of Death, join the band on bass, but honestly, I'm not even going to name off favorite songs because I just don't really like this album at all. Up next at number 10, the album right before that, Darkest Day from 2009. This is another somewhat underwhelming album, to be honest. There's just too many slow and mid-tempo boring riffs and songs. It's 52 minutes long, and that's too long for this many songs to be in the same pace and sound this similar. There are a couple decent songs like Blood to Give and Payback, but all in all, this is not an album I find myself returning to really ever. I re-listened to all these albums to do this discography ranking, and my opinion on these bottom few albums hasn't really changed. They're just not albums that I really enjoy. Up next at number 9, we're going to go all the way back to 1997 with Back from the Dead. So this one is a little bit punky in parts, and over the course of the whole album, it is a little bit flat. It's kind of boring. This was their 5th album, and it just does not stand up to the first 4, at all. There are a few decent songs, though, for sure, like the title track, Back from the Dead, and By the Light. But a lot of the other songs kind of blend together. The riffs are very basic. They're not that interesting here. And it just kind of feels, once again, like they're just going through the motions here. It's just not that interesting of an album. They even throw a rap song at the end. That's just not for me. I don't like it at all. They did break up after this album for about 8 years before reuniting, and maybe this album was the reason why, because I do not like this at all. Alright, let's move this right along. Up next in 8th place, I'm going with the album that was their comeback album, Frozen in Time from 2005. So this was definitely a vast improvement over Back from the Dead, in my opinion, but it's still not on the level as their early works. There's some like thrashy and headbangable moments here, but once again, there's other moments where it gets a little bit stale and boring in parts. It just doesn't stand out in over their discography, but the vocals are still the star of the show here. Still a great vocal performance, and there are some decent songs here, like On the Floor, Insane. All in all, it's a decent album. I would listen to this one again, but it's not even close to on par with their best. Up next in 7th place, I'm going to go with the album that was right after that from 2007, Executioner's Return. So this one had a little bit more variation in the tempos and in the songwriting. It was just better pacing throughout the album. It's not really as boring as all the albums that I just mentioned. This saw the addition of Ralph Santola on lead guitars, and he really added a new dimension, bringing really nice solos. The main riffs in these songs are still pretty basic and simple, but it is a little bit better than all those other albums that I just mentioned. It's obviously not on par with their best, but it's okay. Evil Ways, Face Your God, a couple of the standout tracks. All in all, another album that's like okay, but it's still not great, to be honest. Okay, into the top 6 now. In 6th place, I'm going to 2017 with their self-titled album, Obituary. This one is definitely a step up from the few albums that preceded it. It's once again got a very simple approach to the songwriting. As always, that's just the Obituary way. They're stuck in their ways, which isn't always a bad thing. Like I said, like they do what they do and they do it well. But these songs I do find stick out a little bit more than the few albums that were right before this. They're just a little bit better. Maybe they haven't recaptured their glory days on this album, but they felt a little bit re-energized here. Definitely one of their better, like, later day modern albums. Best songs on here, Brave, End It Now. All in all, another album that's decent. I don't return to it too often, but it's okay. All right, now we're into the top 5. You'll notice that I haven't mentioned the brand new album yet. Well, let's mention it right now. Just cracking the top 5. I'm going with the brand new album that was just released, Dying of Everything. So for their modern career, their later day era, this to me is their best album. Look at that album art as well. It's so amazing. Like, this is still not going to be on par with their earlier works, but I find this one is not as one note as some of their more recent albums. There's a little bit of variation in the paces, like there's some heavy thrashing tracks, still got a lot of the mid-pace tracks, but there's really headbangable moments on here, and there's a handful of real standout tracks on this album. I'm sure this will kill in a live setting. Obituary is a great live band. I've seen them twice, so as much as it maybe sounds like I'm being negative on all these other albums, from here on out, it's going to be positive. I like all of these next albums, and seeing them live is great. I hope they tour for this album. I would still go see them. And yeah, some of these songs I can just picture doing really well here. They sound a little bit reinvigorated. They don't sound like they're an old band that doesn't have anything left to contribute. This is a solid album for sure. Like, yeah, there's still a few tracks that maybe aren't as standout, that are kind of bland, but there's enough standout tracks here to make this an engaging listen. Best tracks on here, at least on my first few listens, Barely Alive, the opening track, great thrashy number. My Will to Live is great, By the Dawn. All in all, pretty solid album, one of their best for their modern era. All right, now we're into the top 4, and these are their first 4 albums, but what order am I going to put them in? I like all 4 of these albums, so here we go. Let's go with some positivity now after all these negative comments. In at number 4, I'm going with their 4th album, World Demise, from 1994. This has their trademark sound. It's a very groovy album. It's very heavy death metal. Maybe it's a bit monotonous, but it's got standout moments, and even amongst the similarities between songs, they just are doing the Obituary thing. It has some weird sound effects throughout this album as well, which I guess spices things up a little bit. It's kind of strange. But yeah, best songs on here, Don't Care, of course. They have a music video for that. That was actually probably the first Obituary song I ever heard when I was like 10 years old. It was on the Canadian music station, Much Music. They had a heavy metal station called Much Loud, and every week they would play heavy metal, and I saw the Don't Care video, and it blew me away. Always me and my friends would talk to each other, be like, Don't care! I really don't care. Just fucking hilarious stuff, but I love it. Final Thoughts is another great track. Like, all in all, this isn't their best album, but I would actually listen to this album. I go back to it every now and then. This isn't a band that I listen to a ton other than their top couple albums, but this album is still pretty good. That's why it's in 4th place. All right, up next in 3rd, going with the album right before that, their 3rd album from 1992, The End Complete. So this one, yeah, it maybe was a little more of a mainstream sound compared to the first 2 albums, a little bit more of a polished production, but this is still a very solid early era death metal album. Maybe I don't think it's quite on the level as their first 2 excellent albums, but it's still very solid. Maybe not quite as engaging. It's kind of one note, but it's an enjoyable album nonetheless. The title track, The End Complete, is great. Back to One is solid. All in all, solid slab of Obituary style death metal in 3rd. All right, and that just leaves 2 albums. Their first 2 albums, probably no big shocker here. I'm not doing anything crazy with this ranking. To me, these 2 are great death metal albums, death metal staples. The rest of their discography, yeah, take it or leave it, but these 2 are absolute mandatory must-listens for any death metal fan. These 2 albums I still listen to a lot, really the only ones I go back to all the time. But yeah, what order am I gonna put them in? Let's find out. Coming in 2nd place, I'm going with the debut from 1989, Slowly We Rot. So like I said, this is an old school death metal staple, just came out of the gates firing. This is probably their thrashiest album, just full of thrashy death metal riffs. It's so heavy, but so headbangable and just enjoyable. I love the vibe and atmosphere on this album. The vocals, once again, are what's really steal the show. They're so awesome. And they're not as overdone as on like subsequent later albums where maybe it was a little bit overproduced. This is just John Tardy in his rawest form, and it's fucking excellent. An awesome debut death metal record. Favorite tracks on here, the title track, Slowly We Rot, Till Death, Intoxicated, but really front to back, this whole album kicks ass. Great death metal record in 2nd place. That just leaves one, probably no shocker here, their sophomore output, one of the best death metal albums probably ever from 1990, Cause of Death. So really what elevated this album to the top spot was the addition of James Murphy on lead guitar. He added a completely different dimension to this band that they were lacking before, and they have been lacking ever since. If he would have stayed with the band, I can only imagine what they would have done. But yeah, I mean, James Murphy, excellent guitar player. He played in Death, went on to be in Testament. Just really added a whole other level with the solos and lead work. There's a technicality that's just not seen on any of the other Obituary albums, and it's so melodic with his soloing. It's just really elevates this to be, to me, an easy choice for their #1 album. This is just full of classic material. It still like kind of continues in the style of the debut, but it evolves, it got heavier, it's better written, the songs are catchier, and it's just easily their best. The vocals are insanely good here, and these songs just stand the tested time. Chopped in half! Feel the blood spill from your mouth! Just fucking awesome. Every time I think about this album, I have to scream Chopped in Half. I cannot help it. Turned Inside Out is another great song. The title track, Cause of Death, of course, too. All in all, as negative as maybe this video started, don't hate on me too much. I do still love some of their stuff, and Cause of Death is an all-time classic. But like I said earlier as well, if you disagree with this whole thing and you love all their stuff, that's okay too. It's what it's all about. Have some different opinions. Give me some negative comments down below. I can take it. I don't care. These are just my honest takes on all these albums. And like I said, I really don't care. So anyways, until next time, Hammer Heart Metal Reviews, out.